Okay, now, yes, we are ready. So, thank you for being here today, and thank you, Henri, for organizing this event and having us. My name is Estela. I'm coming from Spain. I'm part of Shopify's growth services team. I'm a web performance consultant, and I'm here today to talk about early hints at Shopify. So, let's start with answering the first question. What are early hints? So early hints is an informational status code, one of three early hints. This allows the server to send an early response to the browser even before getting the final response. And this helps the browser to start working on something while the server is still thinking, is still working on the HTML response. So this helps the browser to use these hints because they are hints. They are not mandatory. The browser will decide what they do with that. So they can use these hints to start downloading some critical resources that may be needed for loading the page. So you have two ways to use early hints. You can pre-connect to critical origins that you know that you will need some resources to download from that. And you can preload resources that you know that you will need to load the page. And let me show how early hints work with an example. This is client browser, and in this case, I'm showing Cloudflare. So first, this is a request. A page is request to the CDN. The CDN sends the request back to the origin server, but the CDN responds with those early hints, with those hints that the browser can use to start downloading things. So while the server is working on generating the HTML response, fetching some data from databases and so on, the browser can start downloading those resources while still generating the HTML response. Then you get the HTML response that goes to the CDN. The CDN checks that the hints are up to date while responding with this final response to the client. But what may happen if those early hints are not cached, are not known by the CDN yet? So in this case, you get the same request sent to the CDN directly send that to the origin server, then all the generating part is done, then you get the response. In that part is where the CDN is caching those early hints while responding with the HTML response. So for the first time that a page is requested for a specific location in this case, you won't get the early hints, but the next request will have those early hints. So what's the potential impact? Because we've seen that the browser can start downloading stuff or pre-connecting to some origins. So the connection is already open. Everything should be faster. So you can go from something like this, where you can see that all the resources are downloaded after getting the HTML response. So something like this, where you can see that a bunch of requests are done even before getting the actual HTML response. So that should help to load the page faster, right? In theory. So how does early hints look like? So here you can see that you have that's a get response for a specific page. So you get the early hints, the 103 response first with a bunch of links. In this case, you can see that we have two pre-connects. And then after that, we have some preloads. You have the real pre-connect or real preload argument there. And after that, then you get the 200 response with the HTML body and so on. So how we use early hints at Shopify? So first important, we add by default two pre-connects to our CDN. So like in the previous example, I show you, here you have the two pre-connects to cdn.shopify.com. But merchants can add preloads through different options. So you can use in Liquid the preload tag filter. This generates the link rel preload HTML tag in the HTML response, but it also adds the resource to the link headers with the rel preload attribute. So you can see here different ways to do that, because it's important to notice that you can only use that preload tag if you are using asset URL or global asset URL or Shopify asset URL. So you can see the preload tag, and it's required the as argument, as a script, as a style, as image, Or you can use the preload keyword argument. So in this case, you can only use that when you are using a style sheet tag or image tag filters. So this will add the preload link as well. We have a question there. Come again?
Will do that in the front.
In the content?
Yeah, so we will inject
The link header response, you mean?
the header.
In the link header is part of the header responses. So when you check the response for the HTML, you will have the link header with the links.
You read all the responses on the headers or we issue.
Yes, correct.
So this will to demonstrate.
Yes, this will generate that outcome that will add the links to the, well, it will add the links to the request, to the response when it's sent. And that's what the CDN in this case can cache. So the next time that someone asks for the same page on the same location, that will be sent as part of the 1 of 3 responses. But this is adding the link response, the link header response. Okay. So here's an example of using the style sheet tag and the image tag with the preload true argument. So it's important to notice that you can't preload everything, okay? Because if not, it's like it will like blow everything, no? So you can add up to 10 different resources. And in this case, it's really important to understand the type of resources that you are preloading, because Shopify will just select 10, and first, all the style sheets will go first, then other preloads, usually fonts, after that scripts, and lastly, images. So if you are preloading more than 10 resources, keep in mind the type of resources so you will know what will be added and what will be excluded. So let's see the impact, because I'm happy to say that we have data. Shopify collects data from Shopify's users through a script. And this is really important because we are using that information also to feed the Core Web Vitals reports that you have in the Shopify admin. This also helps us as the growth services team to get information when working with merchants on helping them to improve the Core Web Vitals. And this also helps us to have overall data that can help us to identify potential issues or improvements at a platform level or when working with third-party apps. So based on this data, I want to show you the distribution, how merchants use early hints based on our data. So in this case, you can see in green, sorry, because maybe it's not really big, but in greenish, you have like half of the page views on desktop get just the default pre-connect early hints. So no preload at all, just the pre-connects. Then we have like 25% of the page views are preloading between 1 and 3 resources. Then it's about 4% that are preloading between 4 and 6, about 1% just 7 or plus resources. And then 19%, they are not getting any early hints at all. This doesn't mean that they are not getting the pre-connecting the link response. It's just because, as I mentioned before, the CDN may not have cached early hints for that request on that particular location. So the first request will go back to the client without any early hints. And when checking mobile data, in this case, we can see similarly about 0.5% of the page views are just using the pre-connect links. Then 30% between 1 and 3, between 4 and 6, and 7 or plus is more or less the same as we saw on desktop. And in this case, just 11% of the page views don't get any early hints. So having this in mind, I've checked different metrics to see the potential impact, well, the actual impact that we are seeing from these implementations. And on desktop, this is TTFB. Bear with me because it's kind of hard to see that. But trust me, the green one, just the pre-connect links in this case is slightly better, slightly faster. And then it goes like slower the more resources you are preloading. This is TTFV, but it's actually the time to get the HTML response. It's not time to early hints, let's say. But then checking other loading metrics, we have FCP. In this case, the trend is similar, but it's getting narrower. And if we check LCP, it's getting even more similar. So in this case, well, you can really see that, but not using early hints is something in between. It's a bit slower than using the pre-connect or preloading between 1 and 3. So I wasn't expecting that. It's like why it's slower to get the response without early hints. And as I mentioned before, when you don't get any early hints, in this case, it's because there are not cached early hints. So if we don't have any cache here, that correlates with not having other cache stuff on the backend side. So that's slowing down a bit the response. So the HTML response is slightly slower to get to the final client. So if I isolate the front end part, so removing the TTFP part from the loading, you can see that it's really similar. It's really narrow. So it doesn't matter if you are preloading or not, if you are just pre-connecting or not. Everything looks really similar. And if we check LCP, in this case, the blue one is not early hints at all. So in this case, we see, I didn't say that. I don't know if you're familiar with these trends. This is the percentile distribution. So I'm showing here all the page views from the fastest to the slowest one. Okay, so it goes from percentile 0 to percentile, in this case, up to 90 to avoid weird stuff. So we can see in this case that LCP is slightly faster, so it's lower the line, between P30 up to P80 something. So it seems like based on this data on desktop, the front end side can get some faster responses, faster results when using preload or pre-connect. So when using early hints at some point. That's desktop. So that's, let's say, fast connection, fast devices. But if we check mobile, in this case, you can see that the baseline is showing no early hints and just the pre-connect are the fastest one. And then the more requests you preload, the slower is the response. That makes sense since you are adding more stuff to the to fight for the bandwidth, right? You are trying to download things while you will get at some point the HTML response. And when checking the other loading metrics, we can see that FCP shows more or less the same trend. So no early hints and zero preload, so just the pre-connect are more or less the same. And then it's getting slower. And LCP shows the same, but again, it's getting slightly similar. And if we isolate just the front-end impact, in this case, we can see that not using early hints is faster. So it doesn't matter if you connect or you preload things. It seems like it gets better if you are not preloading anything. And in this case, if you check the LCP, it's mostly the same except for high percentiles. Okay, so at least it seems like the LCP will show up apparently in similar times, just getting the front end part. So in this case, I'd like to know why. I mean, why not using early hints at all could be faster than using early hints when we saw that in theory, we are taking advantage of knowing what needs to be downloaded to make the page faster, right? Right. But let me show you what we know and what we don't know. What we know, I'm checking real user data, and real user data is really diverse. So every single device under its unique conditions is a unique scenario that may show something different values. And generally speaking, mobile conditions tend to be slower than desktop ones, the devices and the network connections. And it's also important to notice that my data is not including Safari. So I'm excluding really fast mobile devices here because I'm checking data that requires it's using some API navigation timings that are not available on Safari. So that's why the dataset is not including Safari. And what we also know based on this data is that preload early hints are not really used. We've seen that half of the page views are just getting by the default pre-connects. Um, oth- uh, Something that we also know is that the CDN pre-connects were really useful when they were introduced, when Shopify started using early hints. because by that time, the resources were basically downloaded from the CDN Shopify.com. But now that's not the case anymore. Now most of the resources will be downloaded directly from the merchant's domain. So pre-connecting, maybe it's not really causing a huge impact here. And again, based on this data, I don't have like a real rule to let you know, okay, if you do this, you will have faster results. And then there are many things that we don't know based on this data. So I don't know if the preloaded resources were actually necessary to build the page, because you can preload, I don't know, something that you need to proceed with the checkout, and you are preloading that through all the pages. So it's a preload, an early hint, but maybe it's just adding some noise because you don't really need that for that particular page. Also, I don't know the type of resources that merchants are preloading. I should go deeper into that data to see if there are any specific correlations between preloading something and seeing better results. Then I don't know if the preloaded resources, maybe they are necessary for the page, but maybe they are not really critical to render the above default content. So maybe it's like you are starting downloading something and adding some load to the bandwidth with something that is not really critical to be downloaded as fast as possible. And we've seen also that we don't really know why merchants are not using early hints. So maybe it's because they don't know how to use them. They are not really aware that they can use that to start preloading something, or maybe they do know, but they are not using that. So I don't know. I don't have these answers. But if there's something that you can take away from this data, is that, as usual, right? With great power comes great responsibility. So it's really important that if you decide to go ahead and use early hints and start preloading resources, you have to do that wisely. So it's important that you are preloading um, the right things, because we've seen that the more things you preload, it can slow down everything. Okay, so you have to make sure that you are choosing the right things, the critical things that are needed to render the above default content. And you don't have to follow exactly the same strategy that you may be following to preload in the HTML. Because when preloading in the HTML, we basically want to make sure that the preload scanner is discovering the resources. In this case, we want to make sure that the browser can download the critical resources to render the content. And something really important, if you decide to go ahead to use early hints, to implement early hints, you must measure what you have. Then you can evaluate what you could preload to accelerate, to speed up that loading process. Then you implement the changes, you measure again, you can assess if those changes made any impact on your real users, and then you can iterate. And that's easier than ever now that you have new Core Web Vitals reports in Shopify's admin. So you have detailed information for LCP, for CLS, for IMP. You can split the data depending on the page type, on the URL. So you can have really deep information, deep data that will help you to assess any changes that you will do. Because sadly, you can't A/B test that. You have to enable that, you have to preload that or not preload that. So it's important that any change that you may do, you can measure that and decide the next steps. Thank you.